He's a former St. Louis County Police Department officer serving in the Tactical Operations Unit as an undercover narcotics and also homicide detective. He's here to talk about the mystery surrounding the murder of Wellston Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's JAY@letradio.com. Calling us from Florida, we have a return guest, Ken Dye. Ken is a former St. Louis County police officer. He worked in narcotics. He was also a homicide detective. He's an author of 5 books, and you can get more information. Just do a Google search for Ken Dye. That's DYE books. And last time you were here, Ken, you talked about the Bi-State Strangler, correct?
Yes, that's right, Jay.
It's a pleasure to have you back here, and we're going to talk about a case that is a mystery, but not really. We're talking about the murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. He was killed October 1st, 1981. Am I correct on that one?
That's correct, yeah. October 1st, 1981.
That's a long time ago. The funny thing is, Ken, I was trying to do some research and looking up Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson, and there's like zero information. If it wasn't for odmp.org, there'd be nothing online about him, and it's a real mystery. So I'm really glad you're here to talk about the case, your investigation of it, and what you know of Sergeant Henderson.
Sure. Sergeant Henderson was a 23-year member of the Wellston Police Department. It's a small department in a city just west of St. Louis, within the confines of St. Louis County, and it's a city that was once a prosperous town, but had fallen on hard times, and now is ruled by crime and drugs. Sergeant Henderson, on the morning that he met his death, was driving down the street about 2 in the morning, and he saw some activity, saw these 2 knuckleheads climbing up a makeshift ladder to break into a small store. And Sergeant Henderson was driving down the street without his lights, and he saw these 2 guys trying to get into the store, and he angled his car in the street, and there was a person on the other side of the street, and Henderson opened up his door and got out of his car, and he says, "Hey, come here, guys." There were 2 guys that he knew. Of course, cops that work the area always know the bad folks in there. And Mark, who was high on PCP, involved in a felony burglary, walked up to Sergeant Henderson and said, "Hey, Jesse." The sergeant turned around and fired one shot right in his heart, and Sergeant Henderson fell to the pavement. Yeah, I think he was dead before he hit the ground. He had $2 in his pocket, and from there, the case began. I got a call about 2:30 in the morning, and said, "Get your butt to Wellston. There's a Wellston police officer been shot, and they want county homicide to handle it." So I said, "Yes." So I jumped into some clothes and combed my hair and took off. And when I got to the scene, I noticed our crime scene investigators had gotten there, and the area where he was shot was taped off about a block each way. And so we started our investigation at that point. The Wellston police officers had locked up, they'd arrested two guys that were involved in this, and one was a juvenile, one was an adult. By an adult, I mean he was 18, and the other was like 16, 15, 16. And we were interviewing these guys at the Wellston Police Department, and then the rumors started. Oh, the cops broke their legs. The cops got a gun to their head.
Yeah. We hear that all the time. And you and I both know, I want to address that really quick. Nobody wants to be the cause of a case being thrown out, especially one involving someone who murdered a police officer or a police sergeant. No one wants to be that guy, ever.
Amen. That is very true.
And I know where this comes from. This comes from Hollywood. We have a job to do. And as difficult as it is, fortunately, in my career, I never had to handle an officer who was killed. I had a good friend who was killed in line of duty shortly after I transferred to another district. I'm still bothered by that, Ken, but I was never on scene for one. Yes, you do want to take revenge. You do want to extract some street justice. You do want to do all those things, but no one wants to jeopardize the case, so you don't do it.
No, you don't. These people were treated with kid gloves. They were given them Mirandas, all that business. But before I could even get my Miranda card out of the wallet, both of these guys are trying to explain to you why they couldn't have been involved in this. And their stories just kept getting more outrageous and ridiculous. But at any rate, as a little sidebar here, one of the kids' fathers came to the police station, and he was concerned about his son, as he should be. And he said, "Is my son all right?" I said, "Just a minute." And I brought the kid out, and I said, "You want to tell your dad how you're being treated?" He said, "Dad, nobody's hitting me or anything." And that seemed to kind of put the quash on it. But you know what, Jay? In the situations like this, the rumors and everything just takes a mind of its own, and it just is amplified and made more ridiculous as the day goes on. And that we were breaking their legs and beating them up and had a gun to their head and all that stuff. It was totally not true.
It usually is not true. Look, to be totally honest, there have been a few cases where people have done things that have been extreme, but they are very much in the minority. We're talking about thousands and thousands of serious, high crime, high profile, high political cases like this one, and very few. Maybe I can count on one hand and have a finger or two left over where we had incidents of bad behavior by the police.
Yes, well, that occurs from time to time, and there's laws and department policy to address that.
How old was Sergeant Jesse Henderson when he was killed?
He was 49.
That's a very young man. And as I said earlier, I'd never had to respond to a call of an officer killed. Many that were injured, many that had been in brawls or shootings, all that stuff. It's high adrenaline, nerve-wracking, and must have been for you a very emotionally upsetting and difficult experience.
Well, of course it was. Here's a uniformed police officer, been with the police department 23 years, had a wife, a family. He has a son that was a lieutenant in the St. Louis Police Department. A good man by all standards. And
unfortunately, he was taken from us way too young. We're talking with Ken Dye, and we have so much more to talk about. The murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. This is a law enforcement show. Don't go anywhere. It gets really, really disturbing. We'll be right back. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. Return conversation with Ken Dye. He is a repeat guest, something that doesn't happen very often. He's a former St. Louis County Police Department police officer, serving in a tactical operations unit, also as undercover narcotics detective and a homicide detective. He's the author of 5 books. Do a search online for Ken Dye, that's D-Y-E, books, and you'll be able to find them. We're talking about the murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. Happened October 1st, 1981. You're lead detective on this.
Yes, that's correct.
And before we went to break, we're talking about having to respond to a call with an officer being killed. I'll be honest with you, Ken, I've never had to go through that, and I'm grateful I never had to go through that. Police work was hard enough without having to deal with that. That must have been a tremendous amount of pressure for you.
Well, yes, it's a lot of pressure. It was a police officer. It was a stone-cold murder, and it was a real whodunit. We didn't have any idea. We knew what happened. We didn't know who happened it, And so it was a lengthy, exhaustive, and thorough investigation. And we identified the shooter. And it's kind of interesting how he was identified. The two knuckleheads that were burglarizing this thing finally turned. They offered a confession and told us, just laid out what happened. And one of the guys, the juvenile, was packed off to the juvenile facility in Boonville, Missouri, about in the middle of the state. And we got a court order to go up and talk to this guy. And when I went to pick him up and bring him back to the grand jury to testify, he was in there. He got a haircut, glasses, cleaned up, and his manners were quite good. So a lot of times these kids that are just street kids, wondering where they're going to sleep, where they're going to eat, and they're committed to state custody, and they really get squared away. But then once they're released, they go right back to the environment from which they came and return to their old ways. But anyway, we brought him back to testify in front of the grand jury about the shooter, and this guy's name was. So he was testifying about how it occurred, how it went down, all this business, and there was some gal from one of the more wealthy areas in St. Louis said, "You didn't actually see Mr. pull the trigger, did you?" And as only a street kid could say, he says, "I seen the fire jump from the gun," and that's all it needed. Boom, he got indicted, and I had to track his down, and we found him hiding in a city someplace, just really low key. So we.
He didn't run away. He didn't go to a different jurisdiction. He stayed low profile in the area.
Yes, he stayed low profile in the area. He thought he had this thing beat, but he was laying low, and he was still plying his trade. He was a killer and a drug dealer, and he's the coldest man I've ever seen. His activities cast a shadow on his soul and made his heart black. He was just a cold son of a gun. He'd look at you, and his eyes would run right through you.
Yeah, I remember meeting some people like that. And, the truth is, Ken, that the vast majority of encounters, even when you arrest people in police work, is not adversarial. It's not bad. And sometimes it's actually friendly. They know the rules of the game. Yeah. And most people, if it wasn't for drugs or alcohol, they wouldn't be in where they're at. Or they had 5 bad minutes of their life, made a bad decision. But there is a small percentage that are hardcore, career, violent criminals, and that's what this guy sounds like.
That's exactly what he is. And as fate would have it, I was transferred to the intelligence unit as a deputy commander, and the special prosecutor, who was appointed by the prosecuting attorney, refused to move forward with the case. And
even though he was indicted? He wasn't tried.
He was indicted. He was indicted. We tracked him down, got him locked up, got him in pretrial confinement, and through the course of events, I was transferred to the intelligence unit, and the special prosecutor wouldn't move forward with this, and this career criminal, this killer, was released from custody, and from there he went to St. Joseph, Michigan, where he was once again plying his trade, and he got jammed up over there, and he got 40 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And I kept following this guy, and it said his parole date was 2034. And I even called the Department of Corrections in the Traverse City area and asked them if they had this guy in custody, and they said, yeah. I says, be careful with him, he's a cop killer. And so fast forward about 20 years, I'm sitting down here in sunny Florida, and I got up, and something told me in the back of my mind, whoever, maybe God, and he said, check St. Louis Today. So I went on my computer, and I checked St. Louis Today, and it said, sentenced to 50 years federal time for possession, sale of heroin, possession of a gun. I mean, how many bites at the apple does this guy get?
Some people I met in my career, Ken, had 30, 40 priors, 10 convictions, and you know what? They should never be on the street. I'll interrupt real quick. There was a guy I arrested, I believe it was 1984, with a Colt Python 357 Magnum. And it was a handgun, and a drug dealer said, hey, this guy's come down here to try to shoot somebody. I found him, locked him up. He tried to pull the gun out. Me and another officer got him. Not a big deal. He's arrested. He got convicted to a year and never served it. A little less than a year later, he shot and killed a Baltimore police officer named Vincent Adolfo in a stolen car. And he'd had multiple convictions. He was the second to last man executed in the state of Maryland. And he had multiple convictions, multiple priors, multiple incarcerations. By the time he's in his 30s, he's a stone cold police killer. Exactly.
And Jay, that's why we have prisons. Some of these people just need to be locked away from society.
I've said that to people so many times. People ask me my opinion on gun control. I say, hey, how about we start with criminal control? How about we start with violent career criminals that you cannot rehabilitate? Why don't we lock them up? And I got a really brilliant idea. Let's keep them behind bars where they can't hurt anybody else. We are talking with Ken Dye. We're going to talk more about the murder investigation, the murder of Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson from Wellston Police Department in Missouri. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, @LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. This portion of the show is brought to you in part by Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Everyone's welcome at the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page, where you'll find fun, informative, and enjoyable posts daily. Purebred, mixed breeds, rescues, we love them all. Be sure to like the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Return our conversation with Ken Dye. Ken is a former St. Louis County police detective. He was a homicide detective. He worked narcotics. He was part of the tech operations unit. He did that for many, many years. He's also the author of 5 books. Go online, do a search for Ken Dye Books. That's D-Y-E. Last time Ken was on the show, we talked about his book, An Investigation of the Bi-State Strangler. We're talking about the murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. And this happened October 1981. And I did a little snooping beforehand. Wellston is the west of St. Louis in St. Louis County. And you're a homicide detective, and the county got the call to show up. And you're the lead investigator on this.
That's right, Jay. I was a lead detective on this incident, and we started from nothing, and then we had about 50 detectives from St. Louis County there, and on the first afternoon, after we get everything kind of mapped out, we mapped out where we wanted to conduct interviews in a 2-block area. And fortunately, with a large department like that, you can flood the area with detectives. And since this was a murder of a police officer, everybody was, real anxious to get going.
Oh, we did some serious shaking of the bushes, we'd call it, and
we did.
area
We
canvas.
shook
You talked
the
to
bushes,
everybody,
and we came up with some information. We came up with 2 or 3 semi-decent pieces of information, and then we put them all together, and then we had the two, the juvenile and the young adult, not the shooter. We had them in custody, and we had them in separate rooms, and their stories just kept getting crazier and crazier. One guy said, well, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up to wash my tennis shoes. What kind of baloney is that? And I'm sure you've heard the same kind of silliness. And then the other guy was telling just outlandish stories, and I just said, hey, look, you can either be a witness or you can be a defendant. And I had a prosecuting attorney with me, and he said, that's right. And so the juvenile, he kind of laid everything out for us, and then we went and interviewed the other...
Were they arrested at the scene?
Yeah, they were arrested at the scene right after it occurred by officers from the Wellston Police Department. Then they went to Wellston, and then we took them back to our headquarters and where we wanted to get...
One of the things I think that people need to understand is this is before the advent of all the surveillance video cameras. So you didn't have video where you can say, oh, let's check and see who did it. You have to go by what we called old gumshoe police work. You have to talk to people.
That's right, Jay. It was a shoe leather case. There was no DNA. There was no cameras. There was reluctant witnesses. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm in an alley talking to 2 or 3 knuckleheads, trying to put this thing together. But we did, and it was long, and it was tough, and it was challenging, and it was rewarding when we were able to indict the shooter for this, and I get to go put the cuffs on him, and he cooled his heels in the county jail for about 2 years. Until
the sad part about that is that, the indictment is important. I get that. I really understand that part. But the frustration level for you, where the prosecutor wouldn't try them, wouldn't take it to court, even with all this evidence, must have been extremely frustrating for you.
Of course it's frustrating. I was in the intelligence unit at the time, and somebody called me and told me that, and I said, holy cow. So I left the intelligence office and walked over to the prosecutor's office and walked into this guy's office and said, come on, let 12 people tried and true make that decision, not you just administratively doing that. He said, no, Ken, I'm not going to take it to trial. And I pointed out what we had. And the two main things were these guys, the two witnesses that were not charged, but they were culpable. They laid it out step by step, being interviewed separately, so they couldn't get together and concoct a story. So, that's the best we had, and I was pretty proud of it, and kind of relieved after we got this guy off the street. And I've had a lot of my non-cop friends say, if only you could have better witnesses.
Yeah,
well,
if only you had better evidence. Yeah, all that.
Well, sure.
You get the evidence that's at the case, at the scene. You can't create evidence. You don't create the case you want. You got to go with the case that's presented. And the case of Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson being murdered, first of all, I don't understand, because I've never been on scene in one of these. Hollywood would have you believe that you have the crime scene tape, which is important. You don't allow people in there to disturb the crime scene, which is important, but they'll have the chalk outline and all that stuff. And I think in this case, the way Hollywood presents these murder investigations does a great disservice, especially nowadays. DNA, fingerprints, surveillance video. If you don't have all that stuff, you're going to have a not guilty.
Yeah, that's true, Jay. That's very true. And there's a saying among homicide detectives: you don't pick your cases and you don't pick your evidence.
Right, exactly right. And you go with where the evidence takes you. Like you don't create a scenario in your mind and then create the evidence to justify it. It's the other way around.
No, that's right. You got to go with what you got, and you got to put a case together, and you got to put it together under trying situations. The chief of detectives was banging me all the time. Hey, Ken, what's going on with this thing? Let's clean this up. This is a dead police. I said, I know, Chief. Just a minute. I'm working on it. I know you are. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, but then you had the conversation with the district attorney, and he wouldn't try the case.
No, I wouldn't. He wouldn't. And
did he say why?
He said you didn't have enough. I said, you've had 2 years to look at this damn thing, and now you decide not to?
You have two witnesses. They were co-suspects that were given a deal, but they're two witnesses nonetheless. And a witness testimony is direct evidence.
Exactly.
People seem to think, fingerprints, DNA is direct evidence. It is. When someone says, I saw so-and-so do such and such, that is direct evidence. And the jury is the one who decides whether that witness testifying is believable or not.
And I got to tell you, Jay, I think these two guys would have been believable. Now, they would have to have been coached and informed, just answer the question, don't elaborate. If you can, just give them a yes or a no and stuff like that. But they could have been real good witnesses. To this day, I don't know why that guy didn't take it. I wish they would have.
I've heard of some very rare cases where a police officer's been shot and a suspect's been identified, and he was indicted, and there was warrants issued, and he never was brought to trial, even though they had the opportunity. I believe one was in Columbus, Ohio, the last name Cooper. This is probably the first case I've heard of, and I know there are others, where a suspect was indicted for the murder of a police officer and had the opportunity to be brought to trial, and a state's attorney, district attorney, whatever lingo you use, wherever you are in the United States, makes a decision based on their judgment, and usually there's influence from above them, that they're not going to try it. We're going to talk more about this in a few moments. We're talking with Ken Dye. He's the author of 5 books. He's also a former St. Louis County police detective, homicide detective. We're talking about the murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. We'll be right back.
Discover the exciting world of podcasts at hefepods.com. From captivating stories to life advice and much more. There's a podcast for every interest and passion. Be entertained by your favorite radio personalities in both English and Spanish. Don't waste any more time. Find a great English or Spanish language podcast to follow and discover a world of possibilities in your own language. Find the best podcasts at hefepods.com.
In the podcasting world, there's a huge amount of interest in true crime stories, but very few tell the stories of the heroes that fight horrific crime, whether it be law enforcement officers or everyday citizens. So we decided to start a podcast called True Crime Fighters, where we tell their stories. Each episode is no more than 15 minutes long. Do a Google search for True Crime Fighters Podcast, or be sure to check us out and like us on Facebook. Just search for True Crime Fighters. Turn conversation with Ken Dye. Ken is a former St. Louis County, Missouri, a homicide detective. He worked undercover narcotics as part of the Tactical Operations Unit, and he's also the author of 5 books. Do a Google search for Ken Dye, D-Y-E books. You can find all of them on Amazon. We're talking about the October 1st, 1981 murder of Wellston, Missouri Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson. You were lead detective on that case. And what's really troublesome about this case, you had 2 co-defendants, for lack of better words, that were given a deal, that were testifying, that could put the gun in the shooter's hand. The shooter was indicted and went to the state's attorney, and they said, no, we're not prosecuting him.
That's correct. And it bothered me then. It bothers me today. I keep track of this guy, and there's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I can remember sitting at the table of this sergeant's widow in Florissant, Missouri, explaining to her what we did, and she was a bit beside herself. And then occasionally I'll go to Officer Down Memorial page just to say hello to Jesse, and I saw that there was some messages there from his daughters, and I emailed them, and they said, well, how'd you get my name? I said, well, I stopped by to say hello to your dad, and I saw your name, and I just threw it out there, and then I had some conversation with them, and I straightened it out for them because they were thinking something else, and I said, no, I'm telling you, your dad was killed by a heartless, soulless thug who was whacked out on PCP and shot your dad in cold blood. And it bothers me. It bothered me then. It bothers me today. There's not a day goes by that I don't think about that guy. And you always play what if, Jay.
Yeah.
You say, what could I have done more? What I know there's something I could have done, but I didn't do it. And you kind of blame yourself, to a certain extent. You don't let it eat you alive, of course.
And by the way, that's natural. It's part of the learning process. Every time we had a case, you said, what could I have done better? What could I have been more professional about? What could I have done? Where did I screw up? That's how you become a better cop. And the thing is, like trial preparation, earlier you talked about you get coached by the defense attorney, not defense attorney, the prosecuting attorney, which basically means, hey, don't get mad. They're going to, as a cop, what's the first thing they do? They go after the cop. They try to get you mad. They try to make it personal. You blew it. You did a horrible job. Or in the case of, I'm sure, Sergeant Henderson, they'll try to cast aspersions on him. He was doing something he shouldn't be doing. That's why he was killed. Anybody else in the world did that, they'd be like, you can't blame the victim for what occurred.
Oh, of course not.
But you got the job.
There seems to be a trend in that direction.
Yeah. But you got the job of having to explain to his family afterwards. This is something else that a lot of people don't realize. The detectives involved and the family members of the murdered victims oftentimes meet multiple times, have multiple conversations, and it's always about a really difficult topic.
Yes, it is. It's difficult to discuss the death of a loved one, especially the murder of a good cop. Like you said, they're going to try and blame it on Henderson must have been doing something wrong, or he was involved in some kind of corruption. Well, he wasn't. He was just a good, solid man, a good, solid cop, and he died on that street that fall morning with $2 in his pocket.
Yeah.
And it just ain't right, Jay.
And his family is left to hold the bag afterwards.
Sure, I'm sure they're traumatized. They were, and he has a very nice family. His sons and daughters are very nice people, and the conversations we had with them were extremely tough. I guess is the only way to put it. They're very polite, very understanding and everything, but I damn it, there's something if I could have just done something, I don't know what it would have been, and I don't know what it would have been today, but it sure crosses your memory.
Yeah. Well, they say hindsight's 20/20, but even back then, we didn't have DNA. We didn't have and people will say, well, what about fingerprints? I can tell you the amount of times they got a fingerprint off a gun, it's like next to impossible. You didn't have the ability to get DNA off of a gun because it didn't exist back then. You didn't have surveillance videos. You didn't have any of the things that we take for granted nowadays to solve cases, and you had to go with, and by the way, co-defendants are not choir boys. They're never going to be choir boys. They're going to have shady backgrounds, and that's for the jury to decipher and settle. It's for the jury and a judge. I've had many arguments with state's attorneys about not trying cases. I can't imagine being civil in this one with this conversation.
Well, it was rather lively, shall we say?
Yeah, I'm sure. For the sake of radio, we'll leave it at that. I remember having conversations and being livid, Ken, saying to him, just do your job. If it gets found not guilty, you at least did your job. I did my job, do your job.
Well, yes. I mean, that's not. You're not being unreasonable. They're being unreasonable. Do your job. It's tough to prepare for a murder case. It's tough to prepare for any case, but that's what you get paid for. Let's go to work. And offered to help him any way it could. I wrote a report that was about 3 inches thick, and it had everything in it, everybody I talked to, and there have been about 10 people just put in bits and pieces. We even went so far as to go down to the University of Mississippi and talk to a witness down there, and it was it was a good case. It was a good case you could have taken to a jury and put on your best case, and if they found him not guilty, well,
you did your best. You did your job.
You did your best.
Please tell me there is some karma, some street justice somewhere along the way where the murderer got what he deserved. Well,
he got what he deserved. He's still in jail doing federal time. I've written to the president saying, the previous president, and saying, don't let this guy out. They were talking about letting out these non-violent drug crimes. Explain to me a non-violent drug crime, Jay. You can't.
Well, a lot of the people that got nailed on the drug crimes had really violent careers before that they weren't charged with. Tell us where people get more information about your books. You have 5 to choose from.
Well, thanks, Jay. Since I left the police department, I started writing in 2009, and my first book was Shadow of the Arch, and then the second one was Beyond the Shadow of the Arch, and that was about a drug and murder gang in St. Louis they were called the Moorish Science Temple of America. Then I was writing a third book, and this Michael Brown incident occurred in Ferguson, Missouri. Everybody knows that one,
right?
And what I was seeing on TV and hearing and all this baloney, I said, that's not right. That's just not right. So I did a deep dive into it, talked to a lot of people, and what everybody was saying actually was not right. Michael Brown didn't have to die is the name of my third book, and he didn't have to die because of his own actions.
Right. Well, that's the thing people lose sight of.
He killed himself.
Exactly. And by the way, just do a Google search for Ken Dye Books. That's D-Y-E. And last time you were on the show, you talked about the Bi-State Strangler. Are you going to write a book about the murder and investigation of Police Sergeant Jesse Henderson?
I've had a lot of people ask me that. I just might. I don't know. We'll just have to see. I have a blog called Cops Perspective, and I was thinking doing one called The Best of Cops Perspective. And it talks about how cops are mistreated.
Ken, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. All very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jay. You're doing a great job, and keep up the good work, and best to you and your family.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or 2 or 3. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.